Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live on a Monday afternoon. Today is October 7th and today we are going to be diving into some of the biggest storylines from the NFL over the course of the weekend. Going to talk about some of the most surprising results. Last night, the Pittsburgh Steelers at home losing a game to the Dallas Cowboys. Great for the Cowboys, but I have some thoughts more so about the Steelers, and I think that they're on fraud watch. We'll be diving into that conversation. We're additionally going to be talking about some of the other key results from the weekend. We saw the Houston Texans defeat the Buffalo Bills as the Bills offense struggled to get themselves going once again. Cincinnati versus Baltimore, overtime game. Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, an incredible quarterback duel, and yet it is the Bengals falling short, and seems like their season might already be over after starting 1-4. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about, as I mentioned, Josh Allen, the New England Patriots as well. Not exactly a shocking game there, but one that I want to fixate on, as I think that we are desperately getting into, a real conversation about the need for Drake May to start. On top of it, you get the news with the team as well that Jabril Peppers has been arrested, so we'll be covering that. And then finally, we are going to end off the show by just giving some brief thoughts on the fact that LeBron James and Bronny James did become the first ever father-son duo to take an NBA court together. So we'll be diving into that as well. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would like to become an even bigger part of the show, you can use the Super Chat feature that is available on YouTube by clicking the dollar sign button at the bottom of the chat. Or you could go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, to leave a tip or donation along with a comment. Your comment will pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. Sunday Night Football, Dallas Cowboys, Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the top two historical teams in the NFL, and neither one of them are exactly firing on all cylinders at this point. That being said, I did think that this was a golden opportunity for the Steelers coming off of their loss last week against the Indianapolis Colts to sort of, stay afloat in this whole race. You have the Ravens behind them who seem to be starting to heat up. And the Steelers, on the other end, do seem to be a little bit rudderless, especially on the offensive side of the ball, where we have been sort of singing Justin Fields' praises for the past few weeks about the improvements that he's making within that Steelers offense. And now we're seeing some real limitations. Really was not much of a passing attack whatsoever for Fields in this game. He was 15 of 27 with just 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. He provided a little bit more in the running game as well, and you could see him extending plays. But obviously, unfortunately, part of it with Fields is he can extend plays to his own demise to some degree as well. And I think that you're just starting to see the more erratic parts of him. Now, it's not that I thought Justin Fields was terrible. I thought that this was a bad offensive approach, truthfully, from Arthur Smith and this Steelers offense. Not taking advantage of the run game. And listen, they are without Jalen Warren and Cordarrelle Patterson for this game. They're second and third string running backs. But Najee is definitely a flawed running back, absolutely. I think he should have been able to go for far more than 42 yards as your lead back in this game. And it's a couple things. It's on Najee himself for never really living up to his draft stature from 2021 when he was a first round pick. But, the offensive line as well is one that we've been highlighting throughout the past month or so of the year, that I don't think they're at the level where they need to be but the inability to take advantage of what is, or at least should be, a diminished Cowboys defense. You add to that as well that Micah Parsons is out, DeMarcus Lawrence is out, their second-round rookie Marshawn Kneeland, I believe, left this game. I might have possibly made a return later in the game, but he leaves the game early in the first quarter. I don't think that he was all too available for them in this game. So you talk about the amount of injuries for the Cowboys on the defensive side of the ball, and this is now at a point with the Steelers where I do think that there are real concerns, and it definitely opens up the door for Russell Wilson to be able to step in. Now, personally, I would still stick with Justin Fields. I've been pro Justin Fields over Russell Wilson headed into the season. I'm not necessarily going to vary off of that yet, but at least based off of what the reporting has been surrounding this game and the overall situation, it does feel like there is still an outside chance that Russell Wilson could step in and become the starting quarterback once again. But, let us know in the comments section what your thoughts are on that. As much as the offense is still a bit, disgrace feels aggressive, but the Steelers' offense has been very much lackluster. This wasn't a great defensive game either, and you're talking about back-to-back weeks where there are some offenses that really aren't all that spectacular who are putting up yards on them. Last week, it was Joe Flacco stepping in for Anthony Richardson in the middle of action. I gave the Steelers a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. That I think that Joe Flacco is still a very fine quarterback. I thought that he reinforced that idea with his performance against the Jaguars just yesterday. But either way, again, throw that one in the trash a little bit. It's always a difficult situation to navigate when you get such a drastic change at quarterback, but also the adjustment is more so on the Colts in that game as well. So maybe I'm even being too nice to the Steelers defense, not being nice to them in this game, where the Cowboys outgained them 445 yards to 226. Now, they made stops in the red zone. This should not have been a game, is the reality of the situation. Because the Cowboys were going up and down the field, they turned the ball over in the red zone a couple times. They get a field goal blocked as well, that the Steelers had every chance to be able to sort of build off of the momentum created, yes, from their defense. So, this whole bend, don't break idea, I give the Steelers defense credit for that. It was also just poor play, I thought, from Dallas, where Dak Prescott really didn't look excellent in this game. He finished 29 of 42, 352 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Now, the Cowboys are a very clearly flawed offense, which is why I'm more so harsher on the Steelers in this situation. The fact that the Cowboys were able to have so much success on the run. Rico Dowell, a pretty nice game for him, 20 carries for 87 yards. The offense as a whole averaged 3.5 yards per carry, which is a pretty significant mark, over 100 yards on the ground against the Steelers defense. I think any Cowboys fan would have taken that number coming into this week. And then from a receiving standpoint, it was a hot start for CeeDee Lamb, but really after that interception that Dak threw, it was in that first half, in the first quarter, I believe itself. I can, double check on the exact timing of it. Appears like it might have been actually late in the second quarter, where Dak was throwing to CeeDee. There was clearly some sort of a miscommunication there, and then it was, at least on the broadcast televised, that CeeDee Lamb had some words for Dak Prescott sitting on the sideline, where a lot of the lip-reading experts out there were talking about the throw of CeeDee Lamb just sort of disappointed, saying subpar ball to Dak Prescott. And Dak ultimately, he leads the drive at the end of the game to be able to go out and win that at the end. Now, again, some good success on the ground for them in that as well, in that drive as well. But Dak to be able to, after seeming to be so out of order for a lot of the game, CeeDee Lamb, he had just one catch, I believe it was, after the first quarter, and it was on that touchdown drive right at the end there for the Cowboys. But, CeeDee Lamb he seems to have a lot of frustration, and it's a situation where Lamb, after having his little outburst against Dak during that Ravens game a couple weeks ago, he said he reflected on it and he felt better. It wasn't super explosive necessarily. Like, I thought that he kept his emotions in check. So I'm definitely not going to butcher CeeDee Lamb by any means because of that. But he talked about this idea that, he's going to grow from it. And he's not going to make that mistake again. It wasn't the exact same mistake. And I can't even say it was a mistake because he was calling out his quarterback for what was a very bad throw. But that being said as well, there is clearly some sort of a divide or a block that's building between Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb that they just have not been on the same page, really going back to that playoff game last year against the Packers, where things were very clearly off then, and we really haven't seen that combination fully emerge just yet. And you wonder if there's, some pent-up emotions being built up on the side of these two players. Really hard to quite put a finger on it because I think that they are both top 10 players at their position. Now, Dak, making the case for him being a top 10 quarterback is probably a little bit more difficult. I still feel like I would stand by that take. I had him as his top 10 quarterback coming into this season, and I don't think that he's been lapped necessarily by all too many guys. Now, there are players that individually have been playing better, but in terms of at their core, if I need you to go, show out in a big moment, I understand that Dak doesn't have an elite track record at that, but he's also, been one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Even if he's not elite, he has been one of the best quarterbacks in the league for the past few seasons. So, again, I'm having a really hard time putting a finger on exactly what it is with that Cowboys offense that isn't there, and specifically referring to that relationship between Dak or CeeDee. But it's another game where, the Cowboys win. You have to give them credit for that. It's a pretty solid win without a number of their top players to be able to go into a hostile environment in Pittsburgh in terrible weather. You have the weather delay at the beginning and still be able to come out on top. That's great. Still haven't been super convincing, really, in either of these past two wins. Now, you get on the board. At the end of the day, the most important stat is the win as opposed to the loss. So the Cowboys will take it. I still don't feel very good about them and their overall long-term Super Bowl aspirations for this season. It's not like there are a ton of teams really in the NFC that feel like they are going to, really be vying for that playoff positioning quite as much as the Cowboys. I do feel like the NFC North as a whole, that is easily the most talented division at this point. Now with the Vikings at 5-0, and we're going to be talking about that game a little bit later as well. But now with the Vikings at 5-0, this is a situation where I feel like ultimately they are able to, maybe build on some things. And at this point, really what I'm getting at is the Vikings are now very solidified in the playoff hunt here, and it would take sort of a lot for them to now collapse and be able to fall out of it, which is possible, but I think that they're in it. I think that the Lions and the Packers are certainly in it. The Chicago Bears continue to improve on a week-to-week basis, so they're in the hunt as well. You look at the NFC West, that division's wide open. Right now it's the Seahawks leading there, even though they're coming off of 2 straight losses as well. That all of those teams are still sort of in the hunt. The 49ers I don't expect to be going anywhere. The Cardinals, as soon as I sort of wanted to lean in towards getting off of them, they pull off an upset win against the 49ers, so they could have their hat in the mix. There are teams, like the Cowboys should not be sitting comfortably right now. Now, again, 3-2 is not a bad position to be in, but I think we need to start to see a lot better production on the field from their offense is really what it comes down to as well, because their defense played well in this game, and give them their props. Specifically, DeMarvion Overshown has become, a real standout player for them on defense, and ideally they're going to get healthier from here. But as things stand right now, they are a defense that can get moved around a little bit. didn't quite come up in this game, but I think the Cowboys are not quite at contention level. Now, they benefit from playing in the NFC East, which hasn't looked great, but now you also have the Commanders in the mix along with the Eagles. There are a lot of obstacles for the Cowboys moving forward here. So I don't think they can be feeling great. Steelers have to be feeling pretty poor. We'll see what the reporting around that Justin Fields and Russell Wilson situation is as the week plays out here. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section on this game, as we are going to be pivoting a little bit and moving on to the thrilling game between the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals that occurred earlier in the afternoon. So we're going to be diving into that game. But before we do so, we're going to have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up in the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place. I'll diss my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it. The losing fits. I'm losing shit. It's stupid. If you choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the divisional matchup between the Baltimore Ravens and Cincinnati Bengals, and we got a crazy one. Ended up being a barn burner. Ravens outlast the Bengals 41-38 in overtime. This is a game that, we can start a lot of positives for the Ravens. The fact that their offense does continue to be thriving under this new sort of identity. It's prioritizing the run game, and they still had 175 yards on the ground, so that's great for them there. Did finally see Lamar Jackson have to sort of throw his way back into a game, which I have been pretty adamant in the past that people don't give Lamar Jackson the credit he deserves for being able to throw his way back into a game. But, that's what he did in this one, where the Ravens down, I believe it was 10 points in the fourth quarter, and he put together some really instrumental drives down the stretch of this game, specifically the touchdown drive towards the beginning of the quarter to knock the lead down to 3. I thought that he was unbelievable on that one. That was a methodical drive. I want to double check the yardage there, but that one was a 70-yard touchdown drive there, where Lamar was mostly doing it through the air in those situations. Something that is worth noting, at least, and not for a good or a bad reason, but just putting out the facts of, you want to talk about sort of the Derrick Henry role of what is he really in Baltimore, and he is a lead back. Very clear, though, that when they are trailing and playing from behind, game catching up on them, it's a lot less Derrick Henry, which is understandable because of his limitations in the passing game, where we had at least seen, marginal steps in the right direction. But that being said, it's pretty clear that the team favors Justice Hill in those moments, which is probably for the right. I don't know if Hill he didn't do all that much from a production standpoint, but at least worth noting in terms of, again, just this idea of what is Derrick Henry's role with Baltimore right now. And ultimately, you get to overtime, and sort of on that same note of what is Henry, he's the guy who can close the door for you. And there have been people asking questions about, well, what can this Ravens team close games? Because they had the close call against the Cowboys. The week prior to that, it was letting the game slip away from them in a 2-score game in the fourth quarter against the Raiders. So there were these questions about, are the Ravens actually capable of closing the door? I don't know if we have a definitive answer to that, but in come Derrick Henry for the 51-yard run that he ripped off in overtime to be able to get the Ravens into field goal range and walk it off there. Now, walk it off there because the Bengals had possession of the ball, and I mean, it's got to be a very frustrating loss here for Bengals fans that I really do feel for you. It's Lamar Jackson not being able to corral a fumble in overtime, that getting bobbled around, the Bengals taking over the ball inside of the Baltimore 40-yard line, and they just run the ball 3 straight times because they figure they're playing for the field goal. They're going to make this an easy one, and McPherson, who is one of the better kickers in the league, is going to knock it down for them. So Joe Burrow, I mean, that's the thing is, during the fourth quarter, not great. That interception that he had that did sort of lead to the opportunity of the Ravens being able to tie the game and force it to overtime. That's a tough play that Burrow absolutely wants back, but he played more than well enough to win in this game. 30 of 39, 392 yards and 5 touchdowns, plus that final interception. I mean, they didn't even let him do anything in overtime, and I thought it was the right decision because, again, McPherson is a very reliable kicker, and that's a situation where, you feel like that should be largely automatic, but it's not a great snap. The holder ends up fumbling the ball as he goes down to place it, and McPherson ends up missing wide left. And, that sort of freak special teams play, which is ultimately, again, people want to discount special teams. A lot of time that's what it comes down to. Just ask the 49ers as well, who had their game pretty much lost as a result of special teams, that they ended up crumbling here in overtime, and it's very unfortunate for the Bengals, who were a playoff contender, a potential Super Bowl contender coming into the season, and now they're sitting in a place now a few weeks in where, especially the last 4 weeks, I think their offense has been pretty good in large part, but their defense has just been a disaster for them up to this point in the year, where now they are in a situation where they have extremely heavy odds to overcome in order to make a real playoff run at this point. Now, they have a number of winnable games on their schedule coming out ahead here that at least now you get the Chiefs and the Ravens over with. But again, now looking back at it as well, I mean, Patriots and the Commanders appear to be a good team, but still to have that game at home and to come out short in both of those games, I mean, it is largely detrimental for them. So looking at their schedule just a little bit moving forward here, they're playing Sunday Night Football against the Giants on next week, by the way, for NBC to not flex. The Ravens-Commanders game, I think, is going to be next week's matchup. Was talked about getting that into the primetime spot. NBC wouldn't go for it. I mean, that's just a little bit diabolical in my eyes to not see them, having these two very exciting quarterbacks and Lamar and Jaden Daniels face off against each other. And now we're talking about a 2-win Giants team that is probably, better than what their record is, or worse than what their record is, and the Bengals being 1-4. And, I still think that they're a solid team overall, but playoffs feel like a huge stretch for them at this point. So, anyways, that's a whole different aside there. But for the Bengals, it is on the road against the Giants, at Cleveland, versus Philadelphia. A tough one, winnable, but I don't know how much I trust this Bengals team as a whole now, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Like, at home against the Raiders is winnable, and then you have another matchup on the road against the Ravens, and then on the road again against the Chargers, and then a bye. I mean, at that point, I think realistically, those are 6 games that I just rattled off, and at that point, they'll be now 11 games into the season by the time they get to their bye week. I think that they probably have to win a minimum of 4 of those games. You probably have to win 5 of the 6. Like, there is just such little wiggle room for them at this point. And I don't know if I have the confidence level in that defense to be able to, keep them in games, because now you look at Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow appear to be on the same page once again, and you have T. Higgins with a big-time game as well. For Chase, Chase, unbelievable. To anybody who is doubting whether or not he is still one of the elite wide receivers, 10 receptions, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns there. But T. Higgins as well, 9 catches for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. So you have both of your pass catchers back, and the offense is clicking, and you still just don't have any real semblance of a defense. I saw people trying to pin it on the rushing game, which, to be fair, isn't exactly great for the Bengals, where 23 carries for 71 yards, very much lackluster. Their offense isn't the reason they lost this game. We could admit that, there are still definitely deficiencies in that running game, and maybe if it were better, they would have been able to do a better job of closing it. I do think that Chase Brown has sort of emerged as, I think he's going to be taking over the leading back spot moving forward here, but that's neither here nor there. The defense has just been absolutely brutal for them, where you look at this recent stretch of games for them where they allow 41 points to the Ravens, even last week in a win, but allowing 24 to the Panthers. That's a situation where, listen, I understand that the Panthers are actually a somewhat feasible offense at this point, but definitely didn't look good in this week's game against the Bears. So, it would have been a huge statement spot for the Bengals defense to show out in that game. Instead, you allow 24 points, coming off of allowing 38 to the Commanders as well. So it's a mess there for the Bengals. And again, I am still going to be a defender of Joe Burrow and that offense, because I just don't think that is the problem with this team. But that being said, this team has problems, and they have them on both sides of the ball. I don't think the offensive line exactly is all that great either. I know dealing with a couple injuries at tackle there, but this is a Bengals team that, I wouldn't bet my entire life savings against them missing the playoffs, because I still feel like they're a talented enough team, and when you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, that it's hard for me to totally count you out. But this is just getting into very dangerous territory for the Bengals, and I don't know if they are actually going to be able to recover. But I guess sort of to wrap things up, I do want to give credit to the Ravens, because that secondary, still not great. That's something that we highlighted against the Raiders when they got picked apart in the second half of that game. Would prefer to see them, play opposing offenses better. But, they do have the talent. Nate Wiggins played in this game. I thought he was all right. He is still a little bit in a bigger role than I would probably prefer him to, considering I don't think that he's extremely NFL ready up to this point. But, he's had his contributions to this secondary. But, again, I do think it's a bit of a concern. I don't know exactly what it is. I feel like they're not a bad defense in terms of applying pressure, but for whatever reason, opposing offenses are having success throwing against the Ravens right now. Something that they absolutely are going to need to correct. And, time will tell here. But let me know what your takeaways were from this game. We are going to be moving on to another one of those top AFC contenders, or at least perceived to be, in the Buffalo Bills, where once again, that Bills offense really struggled to develop all that much of a rhythm. Josh Allen finished the game, I believe it was 9 of 30. So we are going to be diving into what exactly went wrong with the Bills and, talk about their chances moving forward here, because they are in a very winnable division, but this is certainly not a winning brand of football that they've put out on the field these past couple weeks. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the game between the Houston Texans and Buffalo Bills. This was being labeled as the Stephon Diggs revenge game coming into the week. We got a little bit of that, I suppose. Diggs had a fine game for himself. Ultimately, it was 6 receptions for 82 yards, no touchdowns. He was fine. This was more so about Diggs. I don't know. I'm not ready to say he was proven right about some of the comments he made about Josh Allen. But, he sent out a little bit of cryptic messages of, what are we sure that Josh Allen is going to look great once he no longer has a wide receiver 1? And through the first few weeks, Josh Allen was the early MVP favorite, and by a significant margin at that as well. But I do think there was also a little bit of an understanding as a whole from the NFL community, at least the ones that were maybe a little bit more rational, that there were still going to be challenges to come with this Bills roster, that the fact that they are sort of up against it in terms of having some of these other teams just outclassing them from an on-paper, talent comparison. And I think that we definitely saw that in this game. And specifically, we're seeing with the Bills offense really what it looks like, having this lack of a number 1 weapon for Josh Allen to lean on, especially having Khalil Shakir out in this game. That was definitely a big loss for them. But even if there isn't a true number 1 wide receiver that has great game-breaking talents, this was a very bad game from Josh Allen. 9 of 30, 131 yards, and 1 touchdown. Added another 54 yards on the ground. So, we understand that he is capable of making big-time plays. And when the Bills' offense was starting to heat up in the third quarter, it was in large part due to Josh Allen. That being said, he left a lot of chances out there on the table. I thought especially so in the first half, where you just see the inaccuracies with him. And yeah, sure, there's a play, on a deep shot to Mac Hollins where I thought that his throw was off. Mac Hollins probably could have played that one better, and it was likely going for a touchdown had they converted there, but both parties should be held responsible. That's kind of where you start to get those specific cases of, okay, Josh Allen, you are now the highest paid player on the roster. As a result, you're going to have to work with lesser targets, and you gotta just be a little bit more precise with some of these passes, and he just was not in this game. There was that deep shot to Mac Hollins. There was another one where Hollins was wide open in the middle of the field on a 3rd and long. Now, at that point, Allen was rolling out of the pocket, so not an easy throw necessarily. But again, the inaccuracies with him were very much on display in this game. And, if this is the worst game you're ever going to get from Josh Allen, it is a statement about how, he still has a very high floor, I would argue, that he can still, get you real impactful plays even when he's not at his sharpest. And we didn't see him turn the ball over as well, so it's not like that was an issue either that got in the way. It's not like you were getting the hair on fire Josh Allen that was, making overzealous plays and making mistakes there. It's just, you got a little bit of an erratic version of him in this game. And that's with having an actual decent rushing attack in this game as well. James Cook, 20 carries for 82 yards, 4.1 yards per carry, a touchdown there. So, they were moving the ball decently well on the ground. It's just the semblance of a passing game was non-existent for the second straight week. And that's something you can't have with Josh Allen. And again, I do understand that they are a limited receiver core, especially without Shakir. But you do have a couple tight ends that I think are positive assets to you in Dalton Kincaid and in Dawson Knox. Both of them, I think, are at least, viable options for you. Keon Coleman, just one catch, and it was on that 49-yard touchdown where he was just able to burn the defenders. But, not very much success there with Keon Coleman. 5 targets and didn't really pay off for them. Like I mentioned, a couple missed shots to Mac Hollins. That this game was fully on the passing game and on the coaching as well, of course. If you didn't catch any of it as well, the very Spark Notes version of this would be the fact that the Bills got the ball back with 30 seconds left in regulation, backed up on their own 3-yard line, and I really do not know what the thought process was, and I'm sure McDermott and Allen have commented on it post-game, but the fact that they, from their own 3-yard line, basically no timeouts either, so the scoring upside was pretty much non-existent, that they threw 3 straight incompletions, at least, one of them was almost intercepted on that first throw. They end up shanking a punt that puts the Texans about 5 yards away from field goal range, and they end up getting walked off. I don't know. Again, if you have seen it, I'm going to look into it more myself, but feel free to let us know in the comment section if you have any thoughts on that situation or if you've seen anything specific from Sean McDermott. But that was a disastrous decision. It had Scott Hansen of Red Zone out of his mind confused based off of how that went down. So, as much definitely on the passing game, I'd throw coaching in there as well. I thought the defense played more than well enough to win this game. There was the one busted coverage on that Nico Collins touchdown that, was a difference maker for sure for them. But ultimately, they did a pretty good job of, bottling up the offense, forced a couple turnovers. There was C.J. Stroud fumbling on a strip sack, and he threw an interception at one point as well. So being able to hold on like they were against the Texans felt pretty good to me. And, the running attack really wasn't great for Houston. That was the one area. You saw Terrell Bernard, the linebacker, come back in, who had been dealing with a pec injury since that Dolphins game in week 2, that he was able to play. He, had a solid contribution in this game. I thought the defense was pretty good. And that's what I do want to continue to give Sean McDermott credit for, is the way that they've been able to step up. Christian Benford has been one of the more improved players, I think, at least from a standout perspective of me just watching on a regular basis, that Benford has done a pretty good job, all things considered, throughout this season. And I think that, after having so much offloading of secondary talent during this past offseason, that he's been very much needed for them, of having a positive impact for them. You have Dorian Williams, who has really taken on a bigger role. Specifically, it was when Bernard got hurt in that Week 2 matchup against the Dolphins that Dorian Williams has been able to step into a bigger role, and he's proving himself to the point where Bernard is back in this game, and Dorian Williams is still getting significant snaps for them. So there are positives for the Bills out of all of this, but in terms of the passing game, it's hard to come up with any that they need to be better. Now, quickly here on the Texans side of this game, I think that, again, we are definitely seeing that this is a version of an offense that needs to be better, and specifically the area of improvement for them, I think, is having more success running the ball. Haven't really been able to do that since Joe Mixon left with an injury on that Sunday night game in Week 2. Sounds like he's coming towards a return that, Cam Akers has been fine for them, I suppose, in these past couple weeks. I thought that he showed, some moments in that Vikings game on individual runs, even though the overarching stats weren't all that great for him. This game, 9 carries, 42 yards, and a touchdown. So, he's been somewhat productive for them. Agumbawale as well, at least this game was not the game for him. He's at least been a part of the offense, but, averaged just 2 yards per carry on 15 attempts in this game as well. So I think that Joe Mixon will round them out a lot better. Dameon Pierce, we'll see, again, because now at this point they have so many names in that running back room that it'll be interesting to see who really takes over for them. But I do feel like, generally speaking, the Texans are still making pretty good pace. It was an ugly, ugly loss, absolutely, for them to the Vikings a few weeks ago. But since then, they have, been able to win ugly, which I suppose is, I'm going to choose to at least look at it, of their defense has been very impressive this year. And I think it's a step up from last year where they were able to sort of, overcome, it seems like up to this point at least, some key losses. Blake Cashman and Jonathan Grenard, both players that left. You replace, you at least replace Grenard with Danielle Hunter, who's been a big impact player for them. Henry To'o taking on a bigger role at that linebacker position. So, they've been pretty good, all things considered. And the Texans, still look a little bit young at times. CJ Stroud, a little bit more of a turnover bug, but that was, based off of last year where he was historically great for a rookie in terms of not turning the ball over. That, there are growing pains. Opposing teams have a little bit more film. I'm not worried about the Texans. The Texans are very firmly in that, not that we're going to do power rankings right now, especially since the week isn't over, but the Texans are, in that conversation for being a top 5 team in the NFL. They're in a division that I think is basically theirs for the taking at this point. Now that the Colts, I know the Colts with Flacco have built up maybe a little bit of momentum over the past couple of weeks. Ultimately, I don't think that team's in the hunt, and the Texans should be able to pretty easily cruise their way into a playoff spot. But it's more than just that for them. I think that from here on out, trying to do whatever you can and taking advantage of those divisional matchups, the number one most important thing for them in this as a whole is to take care of business, put yourself in the best possible position for potentially getting that 1 seed. We'll see how things shake out here. They are second in the conference right now behind the Kansas City Chiefs, but they have had a significantly better strength of schedule up to this point. They have more winnable games on the schedule, in my opinion, in relation to the Chiefs. So, if they can find a way to get home field advantage throughout the playoffs, I think it would be massive for CJ Stroud and a team that, is now very talented, but is still, relatively new into the being ultra competitive scene. So I think that would be a huge mark for them. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. We are going to be continuing on here with our NFL coverage, and I want to dive into the mess that currently is the New England Patriots, where, they lose another game big. You have the head coach and Gerard Mayo making some interesting comments about the starting quarterback position moving forward, and on top of all of it as well, one of their best players in Jabril Peppers gets arrested on Saturday. So we're going to dive into the bit of a mess that the New England Patriots currently are. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into my New England Patriots, where really was hoping to just avoid talking about them altogether, but things are getting to a point where it has just been so loud and messy from New England these past few weeks. As just heading into the weekend, there was a whole situation where there was at least rumors. It was a Patriots beat writer that works for Patriots.com went on a podcast and was talking about the locker room is nearing a mutiny, exact words in that conversation, and just how disgruntled everybody appears to be. As he put it in the situation, it was Alan Lazar. It was the offense going against the offense, the defense going against the defense, and just as a whole, this idea as well that there is some real discontent from maybe, again, this is just speculation on his part, that there is some resentment from the players that the Patriots are deciding to sit Drake May as opposed to throwing him out there because of the fact that the Patriots offensive line is very bad, that they don't want to shake his confidence. But there's players that feel like he could do a better job than Jacoby Brissett, and that they're all laying their bodies on the line on a weekly basis. Why isn't Drake May? And it's because Drake May is just frankly far more important than every one of those wide receivers that's currently playing for New England. I'm a Patriots fan. There are a couple guys on that team that I do like. I feel like Jalen Polk has at least shown flashes. Demario Douglas, who had a pretty solid game for himself relative to Patriots standards right now. Once we get Kendrick Bourne fully back on track, I think that he could be a player for them at least. But all that being said, none of them are anywhere near as close in importance to the Patriots franchise than Drake May is. Drake May is basically the only thing that I myself, as a Patriots fan, really have to look forward to, other than the defense as well, where Christian Gonzalez continues to be a star for them on that side of the ball. But realistically, it is just Drake May. That's kind of the long-term hope that he pans out for them. That Gerard Mayo, who has definitely had his share of ups and downs up to this point in the season, we don't really know about him. But I guess, again, Drake May really is the hope. Now, Gerard Mayo did make some pretty interesting comments after the game up to this point. He's kind of been a mixed bag in terms of what he says to the media, where he pretends like he's been consistent, where he had a specific quote about, he said, quote, "I think I've been pretty consistent in my messaging that every single day we're all being evaluated, and that's no different now." He was asked that in relation to what that starting quarterback position looks like between Drake May and Jacoby Brissett. He can say that he's been consistent and that everybody's being evaluated, which is true. I think that he also hasn't exactly been consistent in terms of, how secure that job is. And he's been a little bit back and forth in terms of the quotes that he's given as to where May is and how close he is to being able to start. But it sounds like Mayo is sort of nearing that decision that it might just be time to start Drake May. And given what we saw from the Patriots in this game against the Dolphins, I can understand why. Where they end up losing this game to the Miami Dolphins, who had been the worst offense in the league since Tua Tagovailoa went out with that concussion. And they lose this game, not even because the Dolphins offense just figured it out. The exact ESPN, too, when I looked at the website, the title for the recap that was written on ESPN.com is "The Dolphins made so many mistakes against New England, the Patriots made more in Miami's 15-10 win." Like, that just goes to sort of be an example of how bad things are with New England right now, where you have Jacoby Brissett, where I do feel bad for him because he's a little bit of a sacrificial lamb going out there and just getting, smoked every few plays behind what is a bad offensive line. But I do also want to give some credit to Bill Simmons of The Ringer for, I was listening to some of his show earlier today, and he mentioned this idea that the passing attack with Jacoby Brissett in New England right now is so non-existent that it makes the offensive line look worse because it gives defenses the green light to be able to just send blitzes like crazy. That there's no real threat of, well, what, are they going to throw it over our heads if we send too many at them? Because the Patriots have not shown any capability of really being a downfield passing team up to this point. And again, I don't want to say that it's all on Brissett because the Patriots, they don't exactly have, like I mentioned, their offensive line is flat out not good, and their receiving core is largely mediocre, and it's just a situation where, again, Brissett, sacrificial lamb, there also comes a point where you just have to be able to show something, some sort of a vision of, well, this is what things could look like. And maybe it's just that Brissett isn't the right fit for the Patriots right now, given the fact that he's shown some levels of mobility, but really hasn't been, he's not somebody that's going to scramble himself. He has something like 50 rush yards on the year. Specifically in that Bengals game, I thought that he showed a couple runs downfield for a third down conversion, at least one of them. He's done a fine job of, maneuvering the pressure and everything, but it's clearly not a skill set. To be fair, I don't know if Drake May is going to be ready for that, even still. And I'm sort of at a point here where selfishly as a Patriots fan, I'm like, all right, well, it can't get worse from here. That's a sentence that I've felt myself saying just about every season since Tom Brady left, and it continues to get worse and worse. That I do understand if they feel like they need to apply some sort of a jump start here and put in Drake May. I'm at the point where I understand the risks that are involved. I would be understanding of it. But, that being said, it goes beyond just the quarterback position. And, like I mentioned, there were all of these, ideas at least. I don't even want to call them reports because it's not like Lazar was specifically reporting on it, that it was with any confirmed sources. He was just saying he's been in that locker room and it feels like things are about to get messy. It just continues to get even messier, where now you look at the fact that one of the Patriots' best players right now and a key, signing for them in the offseason, they didn't do all too much. One of their things was to re-secure Jabril Peppers, their safety, for another couple seasons, and it's announced that he is arrested for, we have the specific details on the report. This is according to WBZ Police, that Peppers is charged with, quote, assault and battery on an intimate partner, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, strangulation, and possession of a Class B drug that police believe was cocaine. That was according to the Boston Globe, or WBZ, excuse me. So huge red flags there. Now, it sounds like Peppers' team is pretty confident that they're going to be able to get Peppers fully exonerated. That was sort of the statement that was put out from Peppers' attorney. I think it was this morning, that there is evidence that can contradict the victim's story. So who knows there, but it's just sort of another feather in the dunce cap hat that is currently, on this entire Patriots organization, where it has just been so dysfunctional these past few years. And I think that it gets masked a little bit based off of the fact that the Patriots were good for so long that, again, nobody's ever going to have sympathy for the Patriots fan or anything along those lines. And I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just asking, can we at least all hold the Patriots accountable for how bad things have been these past few years? Because, this is nowhere near. And, you have Robert Kraft in the offseason, putting out the Dynasty, which is basically a half hit piece on Bill Belichick, a half puff piece for him and his role in this entire situation. And why would that even be a thought, that, the Patriots are so much above any one person and Brady and Belichick, that it is, Robert Kraft and the infrastructure that's been carrying this thing? And that's not exactly what they said. It felt like a lot of what the messages were there, and I just could not feel more far off based off of how things have played out these past few seasons. And again, things just somehow continue to keep getting worse. They lose to a Dolphins team that is without multiple starters on each side of the ball, was basically, they were having Tyreek Hill meltdowns is a bit, dramatic, but he was up in arms big time just last week against the Dolphins, coming off of a short week there, and the Patriots can't muster up more than 10 points because that is just the state of what that offense is. So, extremely messy there. Expectations, because the reality of the situation is the Patriots were never supposed to be a good team this year, that they were supposed to be one of the bottom feeders. They sucked me in a little bit following that Bengals win and the Seahawks overtime loss, that they're not going to be a winning team by any means, but they can at least hang around in things. I mean, technically this was a close game, but that's not an accomplishment against this Miami Dolphins team as they currently stand with all of their injuries. So I think the Patriots it seems to be nearing that Drake May, pressing the panic button a little bit and throwing him in there. Again, I'll root for it if it happens because I'm curious to see what Drake May has. I'm a little bit jealous of the fans of a Denver or a Washington or a Chicago that are seeing their rookie quarterbacks take steps in the right direction, and instead I am unfortunately watching this Patriots team that instills really no positive feelings in me, except for Christian Gonzalez. Big Christian Gonzalez guy. But outside of that, Patriots are a mess right now, and that is the reality of the situation. Not a ton to tell you about the Dolphins here. I mean, Jalen Wright looked good for them. I guess that's something. Tyler Huntley maybe looked a little bit more comfortable, but very still clearly, limited in the passing game. That my thoughts haven't really changed there with the Dolphins of where they're at. I think they need to go invest into a better backup option behind Tua, whether Tua plays this year or not. I think they need somebody, at least for the time being, if they want to stay competitive in the playoff race. But you know what? A win's a win for them. So congrats, Miami. You have that going for you. But either way, just a terrible, terrible football game on both ends. But we're going to continue to be talking NFL, of course, through the rest of the week. But I do want to at least mention here the fact that LeBron James and Bronny James took the court together for the first time, first ever father-son duo on a court. So just on an NBA court specifically. I want to dive into that game, just sort of talk about what the developmental process looks like for Bronny James. Had some very interesting conversations earlier this afternoon in the GSMC production meetings, and just talking about what the steps are for Bronny, how he's going to sort of fit into this whole Lakers picture, and then do a little bit of my thoughts, just generally speaking, as the NBA season is nearing a start within the next couple weeks, talking about the Los Angeles Lakers and where they stand in the overall power dynamic and hierarchy of the Western Conference and the NBA as a whole. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are headed into our final segment of the day. And this one, a little bit more lighthearted because we are talking at the end of the day NBA preseason action. But overall, a very cool moment last night in the NBA where we saw the first ever father-son duo on an NBA court together, and that was with LeBron James and Bronny James both playing in this game. And just getting to see that sort of visual aspect of it, of course, I thought it was pretty funny. A lot of people on the internet joking about the fact that LeBron sort of ran up to stand next to Bronny to make sure that we got that shot of the two of them next to each other. But, you know, LeBron's going to get teased for just about anything he does on an NBA court. But genuinely a very, very cool moment to see. And, you know, I think more than anything, it's a testament to LeBron James for the longevity that he's had throughout his career to be able to still be not just like kicking it on the bench of some NBA roster, but to actually still be one of the best players in the league and have his son playing along with him. Huge accomplishment for him as a basketball player and him as a dad. So, you know, that's the positive sort of spin on all of this, is as much as, you know, it's setting up Bronny James for, you know, some criticism. At the end of the day, we all, I think, understand how incredible of an accomplishment this is, even if there was definitely some nepotism at play, which is something that is, you know, a lot of people want to look down on the idea and scold anybody for even mentioning that. Nobody is denying that nepotism is a very real thing in not just sports, but in the entire world. But with quite how defensive people get, I think it's a little bit ridiculous. LeBron may have manufactured a way to get his son to him anyways, but either way, I mean, it's just a cool thing to see, and it'll be this fun little subplot along the way. But that being said, I do have some thoughts on just ultimately what this does look like from Bronny from here. We've now gotten to the point where LeBron's been talking about for years. He wants to be on the same team. He wants to play with Bronny specifically, is sort of what the vision has been. We're here. What are these next steps? And I think that it's really important for Bronny and LeBron to not get too, you know, up in arms or, you know, rising above this idea that Bronny is still a very raw NBA prospect, because we saw some struggles in Summer League. Really didn't look great in this game together. I mean, he recorded a couple rebounds, but outside of that, 4 turnovers in this game. He's not somebody who really can be trusted with the ball in his hands a lot. And to be fair, that's never who he has been, dating at least back to USC. I can't say I'm familiar with, you know, his tape from when he played in high school, but I watched the USC games and he seemed like he needed to sort of take some steps. Specifically, the decisiveness with him is something that I really noticed at USC, where you can see he has basketball knowledge, but it's about having more confidence and taking those quick hit decisions. I feel like he was at USC. Weird situation where obviously the cardiac arrest situation at the end of the summer keeps him out for the first half of the season, that by the time he gets back there, it's a USC team that's already sort of trying to dig themselves out of a bad start to the year. Maybe a little bit of individual, you know, jockeying for positions and looks and stuff along those lines. I know they played better down the stretch of the season, but, you know, I just think it was a weird situation for Bronny there. And that's why I would have preferred to see him stay in college for another year. But ultimately, you make the NBA. If you have that opportunity, hard to pass up on that. But now it's this idea that, you know, Bronny... So this is what I have to do some more research on, is the idea of Bronny being fully receptive to playing in the G League. And that is a situation where they were able to get him in, you know, they gave him a contract that was fully guaranteed, and it wasn't a two-way deal. But I think that he needs to actually play in some of these G League games. And it sounds like he is open for that. And I think that that's the right way to go about it. We had some conversations in the production meeting here at the GSMC Sports Network, and this idea of, well, people are going to make fun of him if he plays in the G League. People are going to make fun of him if he's not good enough in these games. The reality of the situation is, if you're so worried about scrutiny, the NBA probably isn't for you. Because this is, I think, the league where, superstars and just players in general are scrutinized more than in any other league, really, across American sports. Maybe you want to throw quarterbacks in that position as well. But there's no pleasing the NBA community. It's just the reality of the situation. And Bronny, he might struggle at times. The reality is you're not going to step into the league and be a rotation player from day one as the 55th overall pick. And it's one of those situations where, a lot of people have said, oh, well, Bronny's so overly criticized. He's the 55th overall pick. There shouldn't be any expectations for him. Okay, he's the 55th overall pick. Let's start to treat him that way. And that's not, giving, it's to some degree, get your money. I don't have a problem with the fact that the Lakers paid fully guaranteed for Bronny James, but let's start to actually, treat him like that, where he spends some time in the G League to develop, and he sort of works his way up onto the, professional roster, or I don't know what the correct phrasing of that would be, but get him up to the actual Lakers. And I think that we can't put him in baby wrapping paper, or bubble wrap is really what I'm looking for here. It's not a way to actually develop somebody. Sometimes it's about getting thrown into the fire, and this fire that we're talking about is the G League. So I'm not really sure how he's supposed to get full game reps and get used to game speed. If it's not in the G League, and in a situation where he could potentially get exposed, that's just what professional sports is. So this idea that holding out with him and protecting him, I think for his own good, he's got to start to earn it himself. And I think that generally speaking here, sort of last thoughts on all of this, is the majority of, I think, rational NBA fans understand that this is not something that we don't need to really be caring all that much about Bronny James in terms of the analysis of his actual play. It'll be a fun subplot. It has very little significance on the upcoming 2024-25 season, and that's what the bigger deal is right now for the Lakers, being in a position where you don't... I know LeBron continues to prove the world wrong and all of that, but this is a situation where, you don't know how many years left you're going to have of LeBron. And last year, I don't think that anybody was satisfied with the results. Now, Lakers 0-2 in the preseason so far. I really couldn't care less about what your preseason record is. Celtics 2-0, but that's neither here nor there. It really doesn't matter. Just had to drop that in there since we're talking Lakers, obviously. But, I think that JJ Redick has done a lot of good things. I think in terms of, you see the interactions with him and his players, there seems to be very much a mutual understanding, this idea of how he handles the media. Is he a little bit short sometimes and, not embracive? Fine. But also, he doesn't really need to be. He is somebody that he very much is still doing a lot of proving to himself. I think that he's done some good things. You talk about, there have been at least like montages and such that I've seen about him trying to open up more shots for Rui Hachimura. Hasn't necessarily been burying them, but, you can see the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together there. I do still think that the Lakers roster is a little bit lackluster. Now, we'll see. D'Angelo Russell, he had a lot of positive things to say about JJ Redick early on. It seems like the locker room is all bought in there. We'll see how that translates once the actual season kicks off and you have the usual, Lakers media tour of everybody sort of giving their 2 cents on it. I'm going to be guilty of it myself as well, but, I'm not holding them to the expectation that this is a championship competing season for them. It wouldn't be the most surprising thing in the world to me if it did, somehow piece itself together, but it's very, very little depth, I feel like, with this Lakers team right now. And, it would be really nice to see some of their younger players step up and, really develop for them, where you have Max Christie, who some people within the Lakers organization think is going to take a step forward. Dalton Knecht, who I loved at Tennessee. Obviously, I think most people did that watched him, that I think he can be, a day one rotational player for them. Maybe you get Jalen Hood-Schifino to come around, and if not, at least getting them opportunities to at least play and maybe be trade candidates when, things come around there. We'll see. I think that the Lakers are pretty confidently, towards the bottom, or I wouldn't say towards the bottom, but not at the top is more so what I should say, in that Western Conference, where it's going to be very contested at the top there. And I think that the Lakers are probably a class below the top four. I would consider the top four myself to be probably the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, the Thunder, maybe the Mavericks. I'm not as high on the Mavericks as other people are, but Mavericks are probably still better than the Lakers are. You got a lot of competitive teams in there, and I just feel like this is a situation where the Lakers, they've held on to some of these draft picks the past couple years. I understand they don't want to fully sell out if it's not a, true move to make them championship competitors. I think they got to be active on the phones this year is all. And I'm not saying you have to make some sort of blockbuster trade necessarily. I don't know. I guess when I look at that roster in terms of what do I want them to go get, I think that if you could work out some sort of a deal, I feel bad throwing D'Angelo Russell into trade conversations where he's been, for years now, but I do feel like you need an upgrade at point guard, and even not if that. LeBron can play the point for you. I think Austin Reeves can bring the ball up the court himself. I feel like just upgrading D'Angelo Russell into a better fifth starter there, I think, is probably the move. Austin Reeves, I suppose, is on the table, but I have a very hard time imagining that they part ways with him. And then I think they could really use a big as well. This is a team that, Anthony Davis for years has been talking about he doesn't want to play the 5. He kind of has to play the 5, and I agree with it based off of if you're not going to have the jumper, really hard to just because you don't feel like, banging in the paint quite as often, that, just because of the physical toll. I understand protecting your stars, but it's a basketball problem if Anthony Davis is the, a stretch type big for you, or, a 4. I think that's problematic unless you go get another center as well that can shoot. I don't know. Again, I think that there are a number of things the Lakers are just shortcoming in. I don't love their spacing. I don't love their size. I don't love their bench. So I'm not in on the Lakers for this upcoming season, but that being said, it's the Lakers, so they are going to be talked about. Some people still have expectations, especially with LeBron James. I guess we'll see how it all shakes out. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern, same time as always. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.